Number 1.
On January 23, 1964, 3-year-olds twins Todd and Travis Collett were playing with another friend named Greg, who also about 4. The trio was playing at the corner of Hollister Road and Turnpike Road in Santa Barbara, California. The boys knew they weren't supposed to cross the road. At the time, construction for shopping centers was happening. At one point, though, that was what Greg and Todd had done, and Travis stayed behind. About 20 minutes went by and Greg's mother saw him across the street. Mad, she went and brought him back home. She then asked him where Todd was, and he responded with something about a bulldozer and fire. This indicated that Todd may have gone towards the construction site over the Turnpike overpass. A search for Todd ensued. Dogs picked up Todd's scent in the neighborhood and around the railroad tracks. This indicated that Todd had traveled over the Turnpike overpass. At the time, demolition fires were happening at the construction site. They burned for 4 hours until they were extinguished. Law enforcement searched the ashes for Todd's remains, but they weren't found. There was one eyewitness account of an inmate of a chain gang seeing a boy forced into a car by a man and drive up on the turnpike. He didn't think it was significant until he heard of the missing child. Neighbors also remembered a man in a car asking for directions in the area. This unsettled one woman that she asked her children inside. He had asked directions to new houses in a neighborhood full of new houses. A strange man was also noted in the neighborhood, not sure if it's the same man in the car. He spoke good accented English, and he had fair skin, a black beard, and green eyes, and wore a navy blue blazer with an insignia reading New Zealand. It's unsure if this man was involved with this case. It's unsure of what Todd's fate was. Todd is a white male, and was 3 at the time. He's got blonde hair and blue eyes. He was 30 pounds at the time. He has a dimple on his left cheek and a scar on his chest to stomach. He got the scar due to surgery from him getting run over by a car. His head was also ran over at the time, and he may have had a lazy eye and had the tendency to randomly fall asleep after the accident. Todd is one of 5 children. His mother died of cancer in May 2003. The child's case remains unsolved. Foul play is suspected.
Number 2.
In December 1963, Margaret Sheeler and her husband Philip were settling into married life in London, Ontario. Their home, 21 Bridle Path, was located in a townhouse complex geared towards young, well-to-do families. Margaret and Philip had an argument over empty liquor bottles on Friday, December 27, 1963. Afterwards, around 8 p.m., Margaret left in a snowstorm to walk to her parents' house. The next night, Philip reported his 20-year-old pregnant wife missing. On January 23, 1964, 2 boys discovered Margaret's body. She was in a field just west of Bridle Path on Kipps Lane. Margaret was naked, and her clothing was strewn around the field. The autopsy revealed that she had died from a skull fracture. There were no signs of sexual assault. Her death was ruled a homicide. The murder of Margaret and her unborn child is unsolved. Did a stranger murder Margaret? It's very unlikely. Stranger murders aren't as common as people think. There was a terrible snowstorm on the evening Margaret disappeared. It doesn't seem probable that many people were out and in a position to find Margaret after she left her home. Also, her body was found within 1,000 feet, 300 meters, of her house, not affording a killer much of an opportunity to stumble upon her. Did Philip murder his wife in a fit of rage and cover up the crime? This is the likeliest scenario. When women are murdered, the perpetrator is typically their partner or someone close to them. Details of Philip and Margaret's relationship suggest he may have killed her. Philip had a drinking problem and a bad temper. Margaret became pregnant in July of 1963, leading to a shotgun wedding in October 1963. Perhaps Philip was less than keen about taking on the responsibility of a young family. On the night Margaret disappeared, the Sheelers were supposed to host a party. When the guests arrived shortly after 8 p.m., Margaret was already missing. According to the guests, Philip acted strangely. He was drunk, paced frantically, and talked to himself. Philip told them that Margaret had left after an argument and had walked to her parents' house. Notably, Margaret's parents lived over an hour away by car. The family car was still in the driveway. It seems inconceivable that she tried to walk that distance on a dark, stormy night. Also, Margaret's body was found very close to home, suggesting Philip could have easily dumped her body in the field. Who do you think murdered Margaret? Decades have passed since Margaret's murder. But Margaret and her unborn baby still deserve justice. Someone out there might know something about this cold case.
Number 3.
Samuel Lottery was an exceptional teenager. He was always in high spirits. He was a whiz when it came to electronics. He was gifted at basketball and loved listening to hip-hop. At just 17 years old, Samuel disappeared. His family became alarmed on January 19, 1996, when Samuel did not return home. They called local authorities and reported him missing. Not long after his disappearance, in March 1996, Samuel's family began receiving letters about his disappearance, suggesting where his body may be found. One letter was found at the church the family attended, saying his body could be found in Thames River. With the letter came a photograph from Samuel's wallet. Another letter was sent to Samuel's family in November 1996, providing more details on where he could be found by Thames River. Even with this information, police were unable to locate him. In May 1997, an arm bone was found by a man out walking his dog along the Thames River near Blackfriars Bridge. More bones were eventually located. Finally, in April 2008, a human skull was discovered on the bank of the Thames River near Greenway Park. On October 26, 2009, after forensics confirmed the remains were Samuel's, a homicide investigation was officially opened by the London Police Service. Case theories. Theory 1. Sam was murdered by a stranger. Although unlikely, Sam could have been murdered by a stranger. The murderer would have had to find out details about Sam and his family after the murder to write and send the letters. Or perhaps the murderer could have told someone about the crime, and that person either knew Sam's family or found out information about them and then wrote the letters. However, this doesn't account for how the photograph that Sam had with him at the time of his disappearance was included with the first letter. Theory 2. Sam was murdered by someone he knew. There appears to be only one viable theory in this case: Sam was murdered by someone he knew. The London Police Service recently explained, "We know that Samuel Lottery was targeted by one or more people who were known to him, and that multiple people have information about his murder." Given the letters Sam's family received after his disappearance, this makes sense. Although they aren't releasing much information, the London Police Service have called the 2 anonymous notes sent to Sam's family the heart of the investigation. Whoever wrote the letters knew enough about Sam's family to leave one of the letters at their church. Also, the second letter was delivered to Sam's home, suggesting the letter writer either knew where Sam lived or put in the effort to find out the information. Although the content of the letters hasn't been released, the letters could have included personal details about Sam, named a suspect in his murder, or the writer could have taken responsibility for the crime. We don't know if the letters were written by the murderer or a witness, although the inclusion of the photograph Sam had on him at the time of his disappearance makes me lean towards the murderer. Regardless, clearly the police don't have enough evidence to make an arrest, and are waiting on a witness to come forward to help crack this case. Sam and his family deserve some semblance of justice. If you recognize the unique stationery or have any information about the murder of Sam Lottery, please contact the London Police Service at 519-661-5674, Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-TIPS 8477.
Number 4.
Tremendous obstacles stand in the way of finding the killer of a 12-year-old girl. 60 years on, police have said. Under cover of a dark and bitterly cold night of Friday, January 20, 1961, a man parked his car in a lane in Polstead Heath, Suffolk, carried the body of a little girl across a field for about 20 yards, and later down beside a ditch and a hawthorn hedge. Before he went back to his car, he covered her with her mackintosh. The girl was Linda Smith, 12, of Earl's Colne, Essex, and the place where her body was laid was just a mile from the infamous Red Barn, where in 1827 William Corder, a penniless tenant farmer, murdered his girlfriend Maria Martin. Dead Supt Andy Smith said, "The chances of being able to bring Linda's killer to justice after all this time are extremely remote." The unsolved case, which has been the subject of numerous and extensive reviews, is yet to see anyone arrested or charged for Linda's murder. Regrettably, these reviews and successive appeals for information have not provided us with the new evidence we need, added Dead Supt Smith, head of the joint Norfolk and Suffolk Major Investigation Team. Inevitably, the time which has passed since has presented tremendous obstacles to investigate and progress this case further. He cited the diminishing availability of witnesses and not having evidence with which police could apply modern investigative techniques. Witnesses saw Linda, the eldest child in a large family, on her walk to the village newsagents after school. The 15-minute round trip was an almost daily errand for Linda, and she was spotted on her way down Burrows Road to the High Street and looking in the newsagent window. But she did not step inside, and 2 minutes later she crossed the road and chatted to the local cobbler. Although there were many people in the high street, she was not seen alive again. On 20 January, her body was found some 18.5 miles, 29 kilometers away, in a field off Stackwood Road, a narrow lane in Polstead. Dead Supt Smith added, "I would seek to make what is likely to be a final appeal on this significant anniversary for anyone who knows anything about this dreadful crime to make contact with us. It is never too late to do the right thing for Linda and her family. The impact of her murder is indescribable." Linda, the daughter of a foundry worker, disappeared 4 days earlier while on her way to pay a newspaper bill. Her abductor drove 18 miles across the county border into Suffolk to dump her body. His car was seen by a 17-year-old schoolgirl who remembered a darkish car reversing down Potts Lane. Some hours later, Mrs. Edna Humphrey, lying awake, heard the car start up again and drive past her home to the edge of the field. Linda was strangled with her own scarf. The 10 shillings for the newspaper bill was still in her purse.
Number 5.
The remains of King, a 1979 graduate of White Bear Lake High School, were found on September 21, 1982, by loggers working in a wooded area on private land just off Wisconsin Highway 25, about 4 miles north of Ridgeland. An autopsy determined that King had died by homicide in either April or May 1982. He suffered 3 puncture wounds to the chest area with a sharp object that were so deep they left cut marks on the victim's thoracic vertebra, according to police reports. His skull and lower jaw were found about 3 feet away from his skeleton. King, who was an adult, was never reported missing, Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald said, and the case eventually went cold. 1982 was a long time ago, Fitzgerald said Tuesday, January 7th. People did things differently back then. There's no right or wrong. Law enforcement was done differently in 1982 versus 1992 versus 2002. Hopefully, now, the family can have some closure. King's parents, Paul and Judy King, declined to comment when reached by phone at their house in White Bear Lake. "This is very, very painful," she said. Investigators from the Barron County Sheriff's Department informed the Kings about a week ago that their son's remains had been identified. "They were happy to know where he was and that we know it was him," Fitzgerald said. "They were relieved about that. All those years, you don't know that answer, and now you know that answer. Obviously, it's hard to hear the murder part of it, so now we work the second part of this murder investigation." Volunteer genealogists with the DNA Doe Project, a nonprofit volunteer organization formed to identify unidentified remains using forensic genealogy, are credited with discovering King's identity. After uploading King's DNA to a Gedmatch.com database on December 12, they had a match almost immediately, said forensic genealogist Jenny Lekas. "It was our fastest solve ever," said Lekas, who lives in Franklin, Wisconsin, a city in southern Milwaukee County, and served as the team lead on the case. "We got it down to that family almost immediately." Lekas contacted Barron County investigators, who checked databases, and determined there was no indication of proof of life for King after the date the remains were found, she said. They were able to contact family, and they were finally able to make that confirmation. Figuring out the identity of someone who has been a John or Jane Doe is exhilarating, Lika said. We're overjoyed, she said. There's excitement every single time. Your heart starts beating, and you have butterflies in your stomach. But then you start thinking about the family. It's bittersweet. At least they'll know, but it's not good news. We absolutely hope that it will lead to finding the person who committed the crime. Barron County officials learned about DNA Doe Project from an agent with the Wisconsin Division of Criminal Investigation who helped investigate the James Kloss case. Officials submitted the remains of King and bones that were found in 2017 south of Barron that belonged to a man who died of a gunshot wound to his head area. Likas is working on this case as well, she said. The bones were found about 6 miles from where King's remains were found in 1982 on the same road just off of Highway 25, Fitzgerald said. It sounds suspicious, but they don't appear to be connected. It's a 12-mile road. It's a corridor to Minneapolis through Menominee. Melissa Cowley Huff of Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, said Tuesday that she was glad the mystery of King's identity had been solved. Her father, Michael Cowley, of Barron, Wisconsin, who died in 2016, was one of the loggers who found the body. They kept smelling something, she said. They thought a deer had died nearby, and they kept having to work around it, so he said they stopped working to try and find where it was so they could bury it, so that they didn't have to keep smelling it. We always wondered if they found out who he was or what happened. Sarah Schotz-Wurzel of White Bear Township learned the news from a Facebook page devoted to the White Bear Lake class of 1979. She and King used to walk to kindergarten together, she said, and their families both went to St. Mary's of the Lake Catholic Church in White Bear Lake. I saw it and said, oh my gosh, that's Kraig King, she said. I hope all can be put at rest now, and there will be closure for his family and friends. The Barron County Sheriff's Department is asking the public for any information on King and why he would have been in the area in 1982. We've already gotten some calls, Fitzgerald said. Somebody knows something. What we have learned in the past year is, you never give up hope. No matter what, you never give up.
Number 6.
On the night of January 9, 1968, 16-year-old Jacqueline Dunleavy was working at the Stanley Variety Store on Stanley Street at Warncliffe Road in London, Ontario, Canada. She left work at 6:35 p.m. and was last seen walking in front of the store. Witnesses reported seeing Jacqueline waiting at the bus stop, and at least one individual saw her enter a white 4-door sedan, most likely a Chrysler. At around 7 p.m., Jacqueline's parents became concerned and began to search for their usually prompt daughter. Her mother called the store, London Transit Commission, and reached out to Jacqueline's friends. With a growing sense of dread, Jacqueline's father, Constable John Dunleavy, started driving her route home, looking for any trace of his daughter. At approximately 8:10 p.m., 3 teenage boys stumbled upon Jacqueline's body while parking in the lot at the then horrifyingly named Catherine Harley School for Retrainable Retarded Children, today Matthews Hall. Before their discovery, the trio had been keen to go tobogganing at the London Hunt and Country Club. The autopsy later revealed that the left side of Jacqueline's face and head had been severely beaten. Her body had been scratched repeatedly by what appeared to be the murderer's fingernails. There was no indication of sexual penetration, and she had been strangled with her scarf. It has been suggested that the injuries that occurred to Jacqueline's left side may have happened while she was in the passenger seat of the vehicle that picked her up from the bus stop. The tire tread impressions found in the snow at the crime scene are some of the best evidence in Jacqueline's case. The authorities brought in special lighting, took multiple photographs, and made plaster casts of the impressions. Vehicle experts determined that the prime suspect in Jacqueline's murder drove a unique vehicle with 4 completely different tires in terms of make, model, and tread depth, in addition to the worst alignment problems they had ever seen in a vehicle still operating and on the road in the wintertime. A tremendous amount of forensic evidence was found at the crime scene, including blood, semen, and the tire tread impressions previously mentioned. However, neither this treasure trove of evidence nor a police investigation that has spanned decades have yet to identify Jacqueline's killer. Could Jacqueline have been abducted by someone who just happened to drive by her at the bus stop that night? I suppose this is possible. However, crimes of this nature are exceptionally rare, and even though it was a different time, I find it hard to believe that Jacqueline would have willingly entered the vehicle of a total stranger. In my opinion, this makes it much more likely that her killer was at least an acquaintance. It is important to note, though, that eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable. If Jacqueline did not willingly enter the vehicle as the witness claims, then it becomes more probable that her murder could have been committed by a stranger. Was Jacqueline murdered by someone she knew? This is, by far, the most likely explanation. Most women are murdered by an individual at least known to them, if not by someone within their inner circle. In the months leading up to her death, Jacqueline had a pretty set routine. 2 to 3 days a week, she headed to the Stanley Variety Store after school, worked until 6:30 p.m., and then took the bus home from the same bus stop. It would have been easy for someone to learn of Jacqueline's routine and plan their attack. The owner of the store where Jacqueline worked, Joe Clark, employed pretty teenage girls to work the front counter, no doubt in hopes to drum up business. Not only did the store sell an eclectic mix of groceries, housewares, and to-go beverages, but also it offered its special customers access to illegal cosmetics, stolen goods, and porn films on a pay-per-view basis. Shortly after Jacqueline's murder, Clark sold the store and left town. This could be read as an indication that he was involved in her murder. But I am more leaning towards him getting out of Dodge due to the fact that the investigation shone a light on his illegal activities. Although I think it is doubtful Clark was Jacqueline's killer, his culpability for putting her in a vulnerable position at his business is difficult to overlook. The clientele at the variety store where Jacqueline worked offers numerous potential suspects. Michael Arnfield, criminologist and author of Murder City, explained the Stanley Variety was a magnet for some of the shadiest characters inhabiting London. Many of the customers were considered persons of interest, including a regular porn customer with a fixation on Jacqueline, who was a violent drunk and already married to a 16-year-old, a morgue worker who had recently been accused of trying to force a teenage girl into his vehicle at the very same bus stop that Jacqueline had been abducted from, and a youth from the neighborhood that had spent years in reform school for hanging a 7-year-old girl and pleasuring himself while he watched the life drain from her body. Although in my mind all three of these variety store customers are ideal suspects, none have ever been charged with Jacqueline's murder. The forensic evidence gathered in this case may suggest that Jacqueline was murdered by someone who was either already a serial killer or well on their way to becoming one. Jacqueline was on her back in the snow, with her arms straight down along her sides, and her legs closed and placed perfectly straight, almost as though she was in a coffin and ready to be buried. The care taken to display her body in this ceremonial, mortuary position seems to indicate remorse and the need to restore order. Even though Jacqueline had not been sexually penetrated, semen was found on her winter coat that had been left strewn by her remains, and her skirt had been pulled up and her blouse torn open. Leaving Jacqueline exposed in this manner diminishes whatever dignity her careful body placement was meant to denote. Regardless, Jacqueline's body was left out in the open in a relatively busy area. No doubt the killer wanted her body found and his work admired. The specific staging of Jacqueline's body may indicate that her murder was about power and control, and perhaps her killer even took photographs of her remains before fleeing the scene. During the autopsy, a small pack of pink facial tissue was found, lodged in the back of Jacqueline's throat. Although it could have been used as a gag during the murder, it more likely was inserted as some kind of symbolic gesture, the murderer's signature. Evidence of this nature is often held back by the police to eliminate copycats, as well as to determine the validity of any confessions. However, the police decided instead to share this detail with the press, and before you knew it, copycat crimes took place and fear of the tissue slayer spread. You might be wondering how Jacqueline's killer has not yet been identified given the extensive forensic evidence found at the crime scene, especially if they are a serial killer. Even though the limitations of the technology available at the time only enabled authorities to determine that Jacqueline's killer was a secretor with type O blood, it is difficult to understand why there has not been a hit on the killer's blood or semen samples in the DNA databases in the decades since the crime. It has been theorized that the common reasons for a lack of DNA match proposed by the authorities, the perpetrator had not been arrested since 2001, left the country, died, or stopped killing, do not hold water in this case. Instead, Canada's strict regulations on the use of familial DNA may play a role, as it is determined on a case-by-case basis and rarely approved. In other countries, such as the US, familial DNA matches have helped to catch notorious serial killers like the Golden State Killer. Another possibility is the samples from Jacqueline's crime scene could have been stored improperly and degraded, making the match impossible. The theory about the failure to find a DNA match to Jacqueline's killer that I think is the most intriguing, though, is that relatively recent research has found that DNA methylation, the evolving biochemical composition of cells, changes as people age. This could theoretically mean a crime scene sample left in the 1960s wouldn't look the same to the system for comparison purposes as that same suspect's DNA would today, especially under high stringency standards. In other words, Jacqueline's killer might very well have killed again, and his DNA could be in the databases, but it might appear just different enough that it does not result in a DNA match. The ramifications of this for countless other cold cases should give us all pause. Jacqueline was a beloved 16-year-old grade 10 student, and her brutal murder rocked the community. The crime has haunted London Police Service, and it is still prominently featured on the department's Unsolved Murders page. If you want to learn more about this case, in 2019, a gripping and insightful book, The Forest City Killer, was released by Vanessa Brown. It in part explores Jacqueline's case while examining unsolved serial murders in London, Ontario. If you have any information about Jacqueline's murder, please contact London Police Service at 519 661 5670.